The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday afternoon, drumming against the windows of the lantern shelf like impatient fingers. Elliot Crane stood behind the counter, sorting through a shipment of used paperbacks someone had brought in that morning. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking spines for damage, flipping through pages for notes or stains. 25 years of running this place had taught him to spot quality without thinking. The smell of old paper mixed with the coffee he'd brewed an hour ago, now cold in its mug. Outside, Crescent Lake was invisible behind the rain, just a gray presence beyond the fog. The tourist season had ended weeks back, leaving the town quiet again. He preferred it this way. The bell above the door chimed. Elliot glanced up, and his stomach tightened. Tara stood in the doorway, shaking rain from her coat. She wore black today, sleek, expensive, tailored to perfection. Her heels left small wet prints on the worn wooden floor as she approached. Everything about her posture screamed efficiency, impatience, purpose. Elliot, not a greeting, just acknowledgement. He set down the book in his hands, slowly, deliberately. Tara. She didn't waste time looking around, didn't pretend interest in the shelves or the new display he'd set up near the fiction section. Her eyes stayed fixed on him, calculating. We need to talk about your future, she said. I have coffee if you want some. I don't want coffee. She stepped closer to the counter. I want you to listen. Really listen for once. Elliot waited. He'd learned years ago that Tara filled silence like water fills cracks, and silence was often the best defense. She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, turned it toward him. Numbers. Spreadsheets. Projections with upward arrows. Dylan's been working on something brilliant. A tech platform that could revolutionize small business financing. The early models show incredible potential. That's good for him. It needs capital. She lowered the phone. Real capital. The kind that comes from assets, not promises. Tara, this bookstore has been here for decades. The property alone is worth $500,000, probably more with lakefront access. You could sell it, invest in Dylan's future, and finally do something meaningful for your son. The words landed like stones in still water. Elliot felt them sink, felt the ripples spread outward. He picked up his cold coffee, took a sip, set it back down. No, her expression didn't change, but something hardened behind her eyes. You're not even going to consider it. There's nothing to consider. This place isn't for sale. It's a dying business, Elliot. Look around. When was the last time you had a customer? People buy books online now. They get everything delivered. You're standing in a museum, not a store. Then I'm a good curator. Don't be flippant. Her voice sharpened. This is about Dylan, about giving him a real chance. I gave him chances his whole life. I raised him. I taught him to work hard, to value things beyond money. I supported him when he wanted to go to college, when he wanted to marry you. He met her gaze directly. What I won't do is sell my wife's dream for a gamble. Tara's jaw tightened. She gripped the edge of the counter. This shop is what you have left of Clara. I understand that. But she's gone, Elliot. She's been gone for 7 years. Dylan is here. He's alive, and he needs you. He knows where to find me. He's trying to build something, to become someone. He already is someone. Elliot's voice stayed level, but he felt the old anger stirring, the kind that came from watching someone twist your words into weapons. He's my son. That's enough. It should be enough for you too. You're being selfish. I'm being honest. She straightened, composing herself with visible effort. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted, colder, more controlled. You know what I think? I think you're afraid. Afraid that without this place, you'll have to face the fact that Clara's gone and you're alone. You'd rather hide here among dusty books than engage with the real world. Elliot felt something crack inside him, but he didn't let it show. He'd learned that with Tara, showing pain was giving ammunition. You can think whatever helps you sleep, he said quietly. But the answer's still no. She studied him for a long moment, and he saw her making calculations, measuring whether to push harder or retreat. Finally, she picked up her purse from where she'd set it on the counter. Dylan's going to be disappointed. Then Dylan can come talk to me himself. You're making a mistake. I've made plenty. I'll survive one more. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the handle. You know what the sad part is, Elliot? You think you're protecting Clara's memory, but really, you're just protecting yourself from having to admit you failed as a father. The bell chimed as she left. Elliot stood very still, listening to the rain, feeling the weight of the empty store around him. His hands had clenched into fists without him noticing. He opened them slowly, stared at the creases in his palms. Failed as a father. The words echoed, found all the vulnerable places in his chest. He picked up the book he'd been examining before she arrived, a worn copy of Steinbeck, pages soft with age and handling, and tried to focus on the condition of the binding. But his hands were shaking slightly. Outside, a car door slammed. An engine started. Tara drove away through the rain, and Elliot stood alone in the bookstore that was worth $500,000 and contained everything he had left to care about. The days became weeks, and the weeks folded into months. Dylan never came. At first, Elliot waited, expecting the door to open and his son to walk in, maybe angry, maybe hurt, but present, ready to talk, ready to bridge whatever gap Tara had created between them. But the door stayed closed except for the occasional customer, and the phone never rang with Dylan's number. By the second month, Elliot stopped glancing up hopefully every time a bell chimed. By the 6th month, he heard through Mary Chun at the coffee shop that Dylan and Tara had moved to Portland. Something about better opportunities, a bigger market for Dylan's platform. By the first year, he heard the startup had attracted investors. Small money, but enough to keep it alive. By the second year, nothing. Silence. The town filled and emptied with seasons. Summer brought tourists who wandered in looking for beach reads and local history. Fall brought the college kids from Eugene, hunting for used textbooks Elliot didn't stock. Winter brought the locals back, the ones who actually read, who came in for recommendations, and stayed to chat about what they'd finished. Elliot settled into routines that felt both comforting and suffocating. He opened the store at 9, brewed coffee, arranged displays. He ate lunch in the back office, sandwiches he made at home, brought in Tupperware containers Clara had labeled with masking tape and marker. He stayed open until 6, later if someone was browsing seriously. He locked up, walked home along the lake path, ate dinner alone, read until his eyes hurt, slept. Repeat. The photo of Dylan stayed in his desk drawer, not hidden out of shame, but because looking at it felt like pressing on a bruise. Dylan at 12, summer brown and grinning, holding up a fish they'd caught together. That had been a good day. One of hundreds of good days that seemed to count for nothing now. Sometimes Elliot would open the drawer for pens or paper clips and see the photo there, and something in his chest would tighten. He never took it out, never moved it to the wall where customers could see. It felt too private, too raw. By the 3rd year, he heard the startup had collapsed. No details, just whispers passed between people who knew. Something about mismanagement, investor disputes, technical failures. By the 4th year, he heard Tara had left. Just gone one day, no forwarding address. Dylan had apparently stayed in Portland, but nobody knew what he was doing. Elliot didn't chase the information, didn't hire someone to find his son, didn't drive to Portland himself. He told himself it was respect. Dylan was an adult, capable of making his own choices. If he wanted reconciliation, he knew where his father was. But underneath that logic, Elliot knew there was something else. Pride, maybe, or hurt that had calcified into a kind of numb acceptance. He'd offered help the only way he knew how, by standing firm on his principles, by refusing to let Tara manipulate him into betraying Clara's memory. If Dylan couldn't understand that, couldn't see past his wife's ambition to recognize his father's love, then maybe there was nothing more to be done. The 5th year arrived with another brutal Oregon winter. The bookstore survived. Barely some months, but it survived. Elliot had paid off the mortgage years ago, kept his expenses low, saved when he could. The building needed repairs. The roof leaked in one corner. The heating system rattled ominously on cold nights. The paint outside had faded to something between gray and brown. But it stood. The lantern shelf endured. And so did Elliot. He grew quieter in those years, but not softer. His hair went fully gray. His hands developed new calluses from unpacking boxes, arranging shelves, fixing small things that broke. He stopped pretending to make conversation with customers who didn't want it, stopped apologizing for not carrying the latest bestsellers in hardcover. The people who came to the lantern shelf came because they wanted what he offered: old books, honest prices, and a man who remembered what they bought last time and could recommend what they'd like next. It was enough. It had to be enough. One evening in November, just as the rain turned to sleet and the sky went dark at 5 o'clock, Elliot was counting the register when the bell chimed. He looked up, ready to say they were closing soon, and saw a girl in the doorway. She was young, 16, maybe 17. Her jacket was too thin for the weather, her jeans soaked at the cuffs. Her hair hung in wet tangles past her shoulders, dark brown like old wood. She stood there shivering slightly, looking around the store with an expression Elliot couldn't quite read. Fear, maybe, or desperation. "We're open for another few minutes," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "If you need to get out of the weather, you're welcome to look around." She approached slowly, as if testing whether he meant it. Up close, he could see the shadows under her eyes, the chapped redness of her lips. She'd been outside too long. "Sir," as she stopped, swallowed. "Are you hiring?" Elliot set down the stack of bills he'd been counting. "Hiring? I can do anything. Stock shelves, clean, organize. I'm a fast learner. I don't need much money, just something." He studied her face more carefully now. Something about the shape of her cheekbones, the way her eyes sat in her face. Familiar in a way that made his pulse skip. "What's your name?" "Lena." She said it quickly, like she'd practiced. "Lena Cross." "And where are you from, Lena?" "Portland." I've been traveling, looking for work." "You're a long way from home for someone your age." Her jaw tightened. "I don't have a home." The words hung in the cold air between them. Elliot heard the sleet tapping against the windows, heard the old buildings settling around them. "What about your parents?" She looked away, focused on a display of local history books. "My dad died 3 years ago." "My mom." She trailed off, shrugged. "She's not around." "What was your father's name?" The question clearly surprised her. She turned back, met his eyes with sudden wariness. "Why?" "Just wondering." He kept his tone casual, but his heart was beating harder now. "It's a small world sometimes." She hesitated, and he could see her weighing whether to lie, whether to run, whether to trust this old man in an empty bookstore. Finally, she said Dylan. "Dylan Crane." The world tilted. Elliot gripped the edge of the counter hard enough that his knuckles went white. For a moment, he couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in his ears. Dylan had a daughter. His son, the boy in the photograph, the man who'd walked away 5 years ago, had a daughter, and she was standing here asking for work because she had nowhere else to go. "Lena," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "Lena Crane." "Cross," she corrected quickly. "I use my mom's name. Your mother's name is Tara." She went very still. "How do you?" "I'm Elliot Crane." He watched the understanding dawn in her face, watched her eyes go wide. "I'm your grandfather." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The sleet kept falling. The store's heating system kicked on with its familiar rattle. Somewhere outside, a car drove past, tires hissing on wet pavement. Then Lena's face crumpled, and she started crying. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but the quiet, exhausted crying of someone who'd been holding everything in for too long. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Elliot came around the counter slowly, giving her space to run if she wanted to. But she didn't run. She just stood there, falling apart in the middle of his bookstore. "What did you last eat?" he asked. She shook her head, couldn't answer. "Come on." He touched her shoulder gently, guided her toward the back office. "Let's get you warm." Lena ate the sandwich Elliot made her with the focused intensity of someone who hadn't seen food in days. He'd found crackers in his desk, a banana that was just starting to brown, a bottle of water. She consumed everything while he sat across from her in the cramped office, not speaking, just letting her be. The office was small, just room for his desk, 2 chairs, and filing cabinets stuffed with receipts and inventory records. Clara's handwriting still marked some of the folder tabs. The space smelled like old coffee and paper dust. When Lena finished eating, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and finally met his eyes. "I didn't know you were real," she said. "I'm pretty real. I mean, Mom never talked about you. Dad mentioned you sometimes, but it was like she struggled for words. Like you were someone from a story, someone he used to know. Elliot felt the familiar ache settle in his chest. Your father and I had a disagreement. About 5 years ago. The bookstore, Lena said quietly. He told me once, when he was drunk, said his dad chose books over family. The words hit harder than they should have. Elliot swallowed against the tightness in his throat. Is that what he thought? I don't know. He didn't talk much about it. And then she stopped, looked down at her hands. He died. Ow! Heart attack. That's what they told me. He was in a motel in Seattle. Someone found him 2 days later. Elliot closed his eyes. Tried to picture Dylan in some anonymous motel room, alone, dying. Couldn't. Wouldn't. And your mother? Lena's expression hardened. She left a year before that. Said she had business opportunities. Said she'd send money. Never did. So you've been on your own for 4 years? Foster care for a while. I ran a few months ago. She said it matter-of-factly, like she was describing the weather. Figured I'd try to find you. Took me a while to remember the name of the town. Lena, I don't want pity. Her voice was sharp suddenly, defensive. I'm not asking for charity. I just need work. Elliot nodded slowly. Okay. You're hired. $15 an hour, plus lunch. You'll stock shelves, help customers whatever needs doing. We'll start tomorrow at 9. She stared at him. Just like that. Just like that. I don't have anywhere to stay. There's a storeroom in back. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. We can set up a cot, get you some blankets. Her eyes filled with tears again, but she blinked them back furiously. I'll work hard. I know you will. I'll pay you back for the food and everything. Lena, he waited until she looked at him. You don't owe me anything. You're family. She looked away quickly, but not before he saw the emotion cross her face. Hope and fear tangled together. The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm. Lena arrived each morning at 8:45, exactly 15 minutes early. She moved through the store like she was afraid of breaking something, handling books with careful reverence, straightening shelves that didn't need straightening. She wore the same 3 outfits in rotation: jeans, t-shirts, one hoodie with a hole in the sleeve. Elliot didn't comment on the clothes. Instead, he left money in an envelope on her cot one night, labeled advance on wages. The next day, she showed up in new jeans and a jacket that actually fit. She never thanked him directly, but he found the storeroom clean to perfection, every box organized, every surface wiped down. They worked side by side, not talking much at first. Lena seemed wary of questions, of anything that probed too deep. But gradually, in small increments, she relaxed. She told him she liked mysteries best. He started setting aside books he thought she'd enjoy. She mentioned missing school. He found her SAT prep books and left them by her cot. She flinched once when a customer raised his voice about a price. Elliot handled the situation with quiet firmness, and afterward, Lena asked him how he stayed so calm. Practice, he told her, and knowing what's worth fighting about. How do you know? Ask yourself if it matters tomorrow. If it doesn't, let it go. She seemed to consider that. What if everything matters? Then you pick the things that matter most. She went back to shelving books, but he saw her turn the words over in her mind, testing them like coins to see if they were real. By the second month, she started smiling occasionally. By the third, she laughed at something he said about a particularly awful book cover. The sound startled them both, but she still didn't talk about Tara. Not until the day the photograph fell. It was a gray afternoon in February, the kind where the fog never lifted and everything felt muted. Lena was restocking the fiction section, arms full of paperbacks, when she bumped the shelf. Books shifted, one fell, and something slipped out from between the pages. A photograph fluttered to the floor. Elliot was at the register, reviewing invoices. He heard the books hit the ground, looked up to see Lena frozen, staring down at something by her feet. Everything okay? He asked. She didn't answer, just bent slowly, picked up the photo, stared at it. Elliot crossed the store, and when he got close enough to see what she was holding, his stomach dropped. The photo showed Tara, older now, her hair cut short and sleek, wearing diamonds at her ears and throat. She stood next to a man in an expensive suit, both of them smiling at the camera. Behind them, a sign read Cross Capital, building tomorrow's success stories. Where did this come from? Lena's voice was very quiet. Must have been left in a book someone traded in. Elliot reached for it, but she pulled it back, studying every detail. That's her, she whispered. That's my mother. Lena. She said she had to travel for work. She said the money wasn't coming in, that we'd lost everything when Dad's company failed. She said she'd send money as soon as she could. Lena's hands were shaking now. She was building a company. With his ideas. Elliot felt something cold settle in his chest. What do you mean? Lena looked up at him, and her eyes were full of something harder than pain. Understanding. Clarity. Dad used to talk about his platform. His concept for small business financing. He had notebooks full of ideas, projections, everything. Mom took them when she left. Said she needed them for tax records. Her voice was getting stronger, sharper. She stole everything. His work, his money, his life. And then she just left me behind like garbage. Elliot took the photo from her gently, studied it more carefully. The man next to Tara looked familiar, probably some investor or partner. The company name, Cross Capital, was clearly visible behind them. How long ago did she start this company? He asked. I don't know. A year after Dad died, maybe? I saw something about it online once, but I thought it was a different person with the same name. She's using her maiden name. She's pretending he never existed. Lena's voice cracked. She erased him. Elliot felt the anger building slowly, carefully, like a fire being banked for later. Not the hot, explosive rage that burned itself out quickly, but the cold, patient kind that waited for the right moment. Tara had done more than break his son's heart. She'd stolen his work, his legacy, his daughter, and built herself a new life on the ruins. And Dylan had died alone in a motel room, blamed for everything. Tell me about your father, Elliot said quietly. Tell me about his ideas. Over the next hour, Lena talked. She described the notebooks Dylan had kept, the excited way he'd explain his concept, a platform that would help small businesses access capital without predatory interest rates, using AI to assess risk in ways traditional banks couldn't. She remembered him staying up late, working on algorithms, talking to potential investors, dreaming about changing the world. She remembered Tara's cold dismissal of the work, her constant criticism, her insistence that Dylan wasn't smart enough, wasn't business savvy enough, wasn't enough. And then the collapse. The investors pulling out. Dylan spiraling into debt and depression. Tara leaving with barely a word. He tried to keep going, Lena said, even after she left. But he couldn't get funding, couldn't rebuild. And then she trailed off. And then his heart gave out. Elliot finished. She nodded. They sat in silence for a long moment, surrounded by thousands of stories written by other people about other lives. But their story, Dylan's story, was real, and it was unfinished. I have a question, Elliot said finally. Okay. Do you have any proof your father created this platform? Anything with his name on it, his notes, anything? Lena thought about it. I kept one notebook. It was in my bag when I went into foster care. I've carried it with me since. Can I see it? She disappeared into the storeroom, came back with a battered spiral notebook, its cover water-stained and torn. She handed it to him like it was precious. Elliot opened it carefully. Inside, Dylan's handwriting covered page after page, sketches, formulas, business models, projections. It was all there, dated and detailed, clearly the work of months or years. The concept was brilliant. Even Elliot, who understood technology only in the broadest sense, could see that. This is good work, he said. I know. Lena's voice was soft. Dad was smart. Really smart. He just believed the wrong people. Elliot closed the notebook, held it carefully in both hands. An idea was forming, slow but sure, like a photograph developing in solution. Lena, he said, I need you to tell me something honestly. What? If you could make this right, make your father's name mean something again, make your mother answer for what she did, would you want that? She met his eyes directly. Yes. It won't be easy. It might take time. I've got time. He nodded slowly. Then we're going to need help. And we're going to need information. Over the next weeks, Elliot became a student again. He'd spent 30 years running a bookstore. But he'd never stopped reading, never stopped learning. Now he applied that same careful attention to a different kind of research. He started with public records, business filings, corporate registrations, investor documents. Cross Capital was a legitimate company, registered in Oregon 3 years ago. Tara Cross was listed as founder and CEO. The company's stated mission was helping small businesses access growth capital. Sound familiar? He dug deeper, using the library's research databases, paying small fees for archived documents. He found articles about Cross Capital's success, interviews with Tara praising her own vision and innovation. There was no mention of Dylan anywhere, but there were holes in her story. The initial concept papers filed with the state, for instance, were dated 6 months after Dylan's death. The timeline was suspiciously convenient. Elliot started making calls, quiet, careful inquiries. He contacted people who'd worked with Dylan before the collapse. Most were sympathetic but unhelpful, saying they'd moved on and didn't want to get involved. But one man, a former investor named Robert Chun, agreed to talk. They met at a coffee shop in Eugene. Chun was in his 50s, graying at the temples, wearing the kind of casual, expensive clothes that marked him as successful but not showy. "I remember Dylan," Chun said after they'd ordered. "Good kid. Smart as hell. That platform could have worked if he'd had the right support." "What happened?" Elliot asked. "His wife." Chun stirred sugar into his coffee with sharp movements. She was involved in the business side, always pushing Dylan to move faster, promise more, compromise the core concept to attract bigger investors. When things got tough, she bailed. Took a bunch of documents with her, including some proprietary stuff. Did Dylan try to stop her? He was too far gone by then. Depressed, drinking, couldn't focus. "I tried to help, but..." Chun shrugged. "Some people you can't save." Elliot absorbed that, felt the familiar grief settle in his bones. "Did you know she started her own company?" "I heard rumors. Saw her name pop up in industry news a few times." He paused. "You're thinking she used Dylan's work." "I know she did. I have his original notebooks." Chun's eyebrows rose. "That could be significant. Significant enough to prove theft of intellectual property." "Maybe. You need a lawyer, someone who specializes in this kind of case. And it wouldn't be cheap." "I'm not worried about cost." Elliot leaned forward. "I'm worried about justice. My son died believing he'd failed. He didn't fail. He was robbed." Chun studied him for a long moment. "You know what you're starting here? I have some idea. This woman, your former daughter-in-law, she's not going to roll over. People like that, they fight dirty. I'm counting on it." Chun pulled out his phone, tapped through contacts. "I know someone. Patent attorney. Specializes in tech intellectual property. She's tough and she's thorough. If there's a case here, she'll find it." He wrote down a name and number on a napkin, slid it across the table. "Thank you," Elliot said. "Do right by Dylan's memory," Chun replied. "That's thanks enough." The attorney's name was Sharon Walters, and she had an office in Portland that smelled like leather and coffee. She was 40-something, with gray streaks in her black hair and eyes that missed nothing. Elliot brought Lena with him. He wanted her to see this, to understand that what they were doing was real and serious and possible. Sharon listened to their story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When they finished, she asked to see Dylan's notebook. She read it carefully, occasionally asking questions about dates or context. Finally, she set it down and looked at them both. "This is good," she said. "These notes are detailed, dated, clearly original work. If you can prove that Cross Capital's platform is based on these concepts, you have a case for intellectual property theft." "Can we prove it?" Lena asked. "Maybe. We'll need to get access to Cross Capital's system documentation, their original business plans, their source code if possible. We'll need to show substantial overlap between your father's work and their current product." "How do we get that information?" Elliot asked. "Discovery if we file a lawsuit. But that's expensive and slow. Or," she paused, thinking, "there are other approaches. Public records, investor presentations, patents they might have filed. I can have my team start digging." "Do it," Elliot said. Sharon quoted them a retainer fee that would have made most people blink. Elliot wrote the check without hesitating. This was what he'd been saving for. Not retirement, not repairs, but this. Purpose. Over the following weeks, Sharon's team worked methodically. They found investor presentations Tara had given, analyzed the technical specifications she'd shared, compared them to Dylan's notebooks. The overlap was significant. Not word-for-word copying, but the core concepts, the fundamental architecture, the innovative approaches, all of it traced back to Dylan's original work. She was smart, Sharon told them in a follow-up meeting. She changed enough details to make it look original. But the DNA is the same. Is it enough? Lena asked. It's enough to file a claim. Whether it's enough to win. Sharon shrugged. That depends on a lot of factors. How good her lawyers are, what other evidence emerges, how a jury responds to the story. There's something else, Elliot said quietly. He'd been thinking about this for days, turning it over in his mind. Dylan registered preliminary patents on some of his concepts. I found the paperwork. Sharon sat up straighter. He did. Years ago, before the business collapsed. He never pursued them fully, never paid the maintenance fees, so they lapsed. But they exist. That changes things. Sharon pulled the legal pad toward her, started writing rapidly. If we can show prior patent filings, even lapsed ones, it establishes a clear timeline. It proves Dylan was the originator. Can we resurrect them? Lena asked. Not exactly, but we can use them as evidence of prior art, of original creation. And Sharon looked up, and for the first time she smiled. There's something else. When patents lapse, sometimes the rights can be transferred to heirs. Lena, as Dylan's daughter, you might have a claim to the original concepts. Elliot felt something shift in his chest. What does that mean? It means that if we can prove Cross Capital is built on Dylan's intellectual property, and if Lena has a legal claim to that property, she could potentially have ownership rights in the company itself. Lena went very still. I could own my mother's company, or at least a significant portion of it. It would require a lot of legal maneuvering, but it's possible. Elliot looked at his granddaughter, saw the understanding dawning in her face. Not just revenge, not just justice. Restitution. How do we make this happen? He asked. Sharon's smile widened. We're going to need to be creative and aggressive, but I think we can do this. Spring came to Oregon with the smell of rain on new grass and the slow warming of the lake. The lantern shelf stayed open through the season, but Elliot's mind was elsewhere, working through the plan Sharon had constructed like a chess player, thinking 5 moves ahead. The legal claim had been filed quietly. No press, no announcement. Just a formal document alleging intellectual property theft and claiming Lena's inheritance rights to Dylan's original patents and concepts. Tara's lawyers had responded within a week, aggressive, dismissive, threatening countersuits for defamation and harassment. Good, Sharon had said when they received the response. Means we rattled them. But rattling wasn't enough. They needed more. Elliot had transferred the bookstore's ownership to Lena in March, signing papers in Sharon's office while Lena stared at him in shock. Why, she'd asked. Because it's what should have gone to your father, he'd said simply. And through him, to you. But the bookstore was a symbol, not the endgame. The endgame was Cross Capital itself. Sharon had found leverage in an unexpected place. A junior partner at Cross Capital who'd grown uncomfortable with Tara's management style. With the right approach, the right guarantees of anonymity, he'd provided documentation showing that Tara's original platform was suspiciously similar to an old pitch deck he'd found in archived files. The pitch deck was dated before Cross Capital existed, and it had Dylan's name on it. More pieces fell into place. A former investor from Dylan's failed startup came forward with emails from Tara, promising to salvage what we can from the wreckage, emails that proved she'd had access to all of Dylan's work. By April, they had enough to move forward. I want to meet with her, Elliot told Sharon. That's not advisable. Let the lawyers handle. I'm going to meet with her, he repeated, face to face. Sharon sighed. You're sure? I'm sure. Then I'm coming with you. No, he said it gently but firmly. This needs to be personal. Cross Capital's office was in downtown Portland, in one of those glass and steel buildings that reflected the sky and made everything look impersonal. Elliot stood in the lobby, wearing his one good suit, and felt like an imposter among the young professionals hurrying past with their laptops and coffee cups. But he'd made an appointment, simple as that. called the office, said he was a potential investor interested in learning more about the company. They'd given him a slot at 2 o'clock on a Thursday. The receptionist was young and friendly, the kind of person hired to make visitors feel welcome. She directed him to a conference room on the 5th floor, said someone would be right with him. Elliot waited, looking out the window at the city below. He thought about Dylan, wondered what his son would think of this moment. Hoped he'd understand. The door opened. Tara walked in, professional smile in place, hand extended for a shake. She was saying something about being glad to meet him, about Cross Capital's exciting growth trajectory. Then she recognized him. Her smile died. Her hand dropped. Elliot, Tara. They stood there, separated by 10 feet and 5 years of silence. She recovered quickly. He'd give her that. Her expression smoothed into something neutral, controlled. I wasn't expecting you, she said. I'm full of surprises. She closed the door, moved to the other side of the conference table, put it between them like a barrier. If this is about Dylan, it's about a lot of things. Elliot pulled out a folder, set it on the table. But mostly it's about theft. Her jaw tightened. Excuse me. You heard me. He opened the folder, removed papers. Copies of Dylan's notebooks, the lapsed patents, email correspondence, investor testimonies. You took my son's work and built a company on it. You erased his name, pretended it was all yours, and got rich doing it. That's absurd. But her voice was too sharp, too fast. Dylan's platform failed because he wasn't capable of executing on it. I salvaged what I could and created something new. You're lying. Careful, Elliot. Defamation is serious. So is intellectual property theft. He pushed the papers toward her. We filed a claim. Lena, as Dylan's heir, has rights to his original work. And your company is built on that work. Tara picked up the papers, scanned them. He watched her face carefully, saw the calculations happening behind her eyes. This won't hold up, she said finally. The patents lapsed. Dylan abandoned them. He died before he could maintain them. There's a difference. You can't prove. We can prove everything. Elliot leaned forward. We have his notebooks, dated and detailed. We have your emails admitting you took his materials. We have testimony from people who worked with both of you. We have documentation showing that your original platform is substantially identical to his concept. She set the papers down slowly. What do you want? I want you to answer for what you did. I want Dylan's name restored. And I want you to understand that you can't just erase people because they're inconvenient. This is about money, she said dismissively. You want to pay out? Fine. Name your price. I don't want money. Everyone wants money. I want justice. She laughed. It was a cold sound. Justice? You stood in your dusty bookstore and refused to help your own son. You chose books over family, Elliot. You don't get to claim moral high ground now. The words stung, but he'd been expecting them. I refused to fund a venture I didn't believe in. That's not the same as abandoning my son. You're the one who left. You took everything from him. His work, his confidence, his will to keep trying. And when he died, you abandoned his daughter and built yourself a new life. I did what I had to do to survive. You did what was convenient. Elliot's voice stayed level, but there was steel underneath. And now you're going to pay for it. Tara studied him for a long moment, and he saw her reassessing, recalculating. You can't win this. I have resources, lawyers, connections. You're just an old man with a failing bookstore. You're right about one thing, he said quietly. I am old, but I'm not stupid, and I'm not giving up. You took everything from my son. I'm taking it back. This company is mine. Actually, Elliot said, and he felt the satisfaction of this moment settle in his chest like warmth. It's not. He pulled out one final document, slid it across the table. Tara picked it up, read it, and the color drained from her face. What is this? That's a legal transfer of intellectual property rights. Dylan's original patents, even though they lapsed, established prior art. Combined with his notebooks and all the other evidence, Sharon, that's our attorney, found a way to reassign the core intellectual property to its rightful heir. This can't be legal. It is. We've already filed with the patent office. Lena Crane now owns the foundational concepts that Cross Capital is built on. Tara stared at the document like it was a snake. You can't do this. We already have. Elliot stood, gathered his papers. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to restructure the company ownership to reflect Lena's claim. She'll become majority shareholder, controlling interest. You can stay on as an employee if the board decides to keep you, but you won't own this anymore. You won't control it. That's insane. I'll fight this. You'll lose. He said it with quiet certainty. Sharon's good at what she does. We have the documentation, the testimony, the timeline. We have everything we need to prove you stole Dylan's work. You can fight it in court, spend years and hundreds of thousands in legal fees, and still lose. Or you can accept it and keep whatever dignity you have left. Tara stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. You self-righteous bastard. You think you're protecting Dylan's memory? He hated you. He told me that. He hated that you were too small, too scared to dream big. Elliot absorbed the words, felt them looking for purchase in his heart. Found none. Maybe, he said, but he was my son, and I loved him. That's more than you can say. I built this company from nothing. You built it from Dylan's something. And you abandoned your daughter to do it. Lena was 16, Tara, alone and scared, and waiting for a mother who never came back. Something flickered in her face. Shame, maybe, or just irritation at being reminded. She's fine, Tara said. She found you. No thanks to you. What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? That I made mistakes? I did what I had to do to survive. To build something real. You built it on lies. Everyone builds on something. At least I had the courage to build. Elliot looked at her. This woman who'd been part of his family, who'd destroyed his son, who'd walked away from her daughter, and felt nothing but cold distance. You'll be hearing from Sharon, he said. I'd advise getting good legal counsel, though I suspect you'll find this particular battle isn't worth fighting. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. One more thing, he said without turning around. Lena's your boss now. Try not to disappoint her. He left Tara standing alone in her conference room and walked back out into the spring sunshine with the weight of 5 years of silence finally lifted. The legal process took 3 more months. Tara fought, as Elliot had known she would. Her lawyers filed motions, demanded arbitration, threatened appeals. But Sharon was relentless, and the evidence was overwhelming. By June, the settlement was reached. Lena received 51% ownership of Cross Capital, giving her controlling interest. Tara retained a minority share and stayed on as operations director, reporting to a board that Lena would chair. The news made the business press in Portland, a human interest story about a woman inheriting her late father's company. Justice delayed, but ultimately served. Reporters called the Bookstore, but Elliot declined all interviews. This wasn't about publicity. It was about family. On the day the paperwork finalized, Lena sat in the back office of the Lantern Shelf, staring at the documents that made her a businesswoman, a CEO, a person with power and wealth. I don't know how to run a company, she said. You'll learn, Elliot replied. You're smart, and you've got good instincts. What if I mess it up? Then you'll fix it. That's what running a business is, fixing things. She looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw Dylan's determination, Clara's kindness, something new that was purely her own. Thank you, she said quietly. You earned this. No, you gave it to me. You didn't have to help. I was just some kid who showed up in your store. You were my granddaughter. You were family. That's all that mattered. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the store settling around them. Outside, the lake was bright with summer sun. What are you going to do now? Lena asked. Same thing I've always done. Run the bookstore, read too much, drink bad coffee. The bookstore's mine now, remember? You signed it over. Then I guess I'm your employee. She smiled. I'll need someone to manage operations while I'm dealing with Cross Capital. Someone I trust. Sounds like a job offer. It is. Interested. Depends on the salary. How about free coffee and all the books you can read? Done. They shook on it, formal and silly at the same time, and Elliot felt something in his chest loosen. Grief making room for joy, loss making room for hope. August arrived with heat that shimmered off the lake. The Lantern Shelf stayed cool inside, old stone walls holding the temperature steady. Business was good, better than it had been in years. Word had spread about Lena's story, and people came curious, stayed interested, bought books they'd been meaning to read. Lena split her time between Portland and Crescent Lake, learning the business side of Cross Capital while still working shifts at the bookstore. She'd cut her hair short, the way Dylan used to wear his, and Elliot saw his son and her more clearly every day. Tara had quit Cross Capital 2 weeks after the settlement finalized. Lena let her go without a fight, without demands or conditions. Just signed the papers and wished her well. Why didn't you fight to keep her? Elliot had asked. Because I don't want to become her, Lena had said simply. Now, on this hot August afternoon, Lena stood at the counter ringing up a customer's purchase while Elliot shelved returns in the fiction section. The bell chimed, a family came in looking for beach reads, and life continued its ordinary, precious rhythm. When the store emptied for a moment, Lena called back to him. Can I ask you something? Always. Do you think Dad will be proud of what we did? Elliot finished, shelving the last book, walked back to the counter. He pulled out his wallet, removed the photograph he'd been carrying since April. Dylan at 12, grinning with that fish, summer bright and hopeful. I think, Elliot said carefully, that your father made mistakes. And I think I made mistakes. But I also think he loved you, and he loved his work, and he wanted to make a difference. You've done all of that. So yes, I think he'd be proud. Lena touched the photograph gently, traced her father's face with one finger. I wish I could have known you both. Before everything fell apart. We were pretty ordinary, Elliot said. We went fishing, fixed things that broke, argued about books. Nothing special. It sounds special to me. Maybe it was. He put the photo back in his wallet, tucked it away safe. But we're making new memories now. That counts too. Outside, the lake stretched toward the horizon, calm and clear under the August sky. Inside, the bookstore stood solid and warm, filled with stories about other people's lives, other people's struggles and triumphs. But this story, the one about the bookshop and the lie, about family broken and restored, about justice slow but certain, this story was theirs. Elliot straightened a stack of books on the counter, adjusted them until they sat perfectly aligned. Old habits. Good habits. Lena watched him and smiled. You're doing it again, she said. Doing what? The book thing. The straightening. They were crooked. They were fine. Now they're better. She laughed, and the sound filled the store with something that felt like hope, like healing, like home. And Elliot Crane, who'd stood his ground when it mattered, who'd refused to trade his soul for convenience, who'd given his granddaughter back her father's legacy, felt the pieces of his life settling into something that resembled peace. Not forgiveness. He'd never forgive Tara for what she'd done, but peace. And that was enough. The bell chimed. New customers. More books to recommend. More stories to share. The work continued. Life continued. And that, Elliot thought, was the only victory that mattered.